So, hello folks, my name is Renan Capaverde and I'm Director of Engineering at Nubank. Today I'm going to talk about how Nubank is building a customer-obsessed bank. The code for this session is FSV201 and this is a level 200 talk. So this means I'm going to talk about mid-level technical stuff and I'll be happy to take any questions after this presentation about more advanced topics if you want to. So for the agenda today, I'll talk briefly about Nubank, why we created a bank from scratch in the cloud, and how we're putting customer experience first and the pillars that have enabled our engineers to be customer obsessed. I will wrap it up with the lessons learned during the process. In this talk, I'll bring examples and ideas that can be implemented in your own companies, regardless of size and age. Hopefully, there will be direct action taken for you after seeing this presentation. So in order to start, I would like to know how many of you already know Nubank. Please raise your hands. So a good amount of people. So Nubank started 6 years ago in a little house in São Paulo, Brazil. But since day one, we were very, very hungry. We may be selling financial services, but we see ourselves and compare ourselves to tech companies. And to create something meaningful, we knew we would have to have a strong culture. So since the beginning, our BHAG, or Big, Hairy, Audacious goal, was to become the most influential financial services company in the world. And we were going to do it by fighting complexity and empowering people, our customers. And this board is from 6 years ago, and all of it still feels very true in Nubank. So look at the vivid description of success section in that board. And there's a fast decline of the old world happening right now. And how companies are changing their behavior, we can see that happening. And we want our customers to love us fanatically since the day one of our own foundation. And today, I can tell you that we're living this vivid description of success in Brazil. And being customer obsessed is key for this. So today, we're now the largest digital bank in the world outside of Asia, with about 10 million customers. We've seen exponential growth, and this great hockey stick that everyone loves seeing, we did it, while keeping the highest NPS in the industry. There is no trade-off between growth and quality here. What we want to see is customer obsession driving growth, customer experience being our focus. And what we want to have is more satisfied customers. Growth and high NPS are byproducts of this. We've just reached 10 million customers, and we have about 206 people in our engineering team working in more than 270 microservices across more than 40 different teams. And for the people that already know Nubank, one thing that you might not know is that we're starting internationalization. So why would we or any people create a bank from scratch in the cloud, right? That looks insane. But we've seen that Brazil has one of the highest interest rates for revolving credit facilities worldwide. And we also seen there was a big opportunity in quality because the customer experience was actually very bad. And instead of looking at this gap and doing nothing, what we did is, as frustrated customers that we were, we know that this was also a big opportunity. And we thought that if we lower the fees and interest rates and improve the customer experience, we would eventually lead to a sustainable business with more satisfied customers. And this opportunity came for a very genuine place because we were the customers, we knew the pain. And we also asked ourselves, what are the other things we can do to better improve people's life in terms of financial services? So we kind of saw that putting customer experience first was a good priority to have. It will always lead us to a good direction. And there are 4 pillars for Nubank: technology, design, data science and customer experience. So I would like to tell you a quick story that illustrates how we've been doing and how we've been using these pillars to make our customers' life easier. So we know, and you know when you have to travel abroad and you kind of have to call your credit card issuer and tell them they're going to travel so they can put your name in a white list to avoid blocking your card because of some anti-fraud mechanism, right? Well, in case you didn't know, this is a suboptimal customer experience. And from a business point of view, this is also not great because you're ending up with a lot of tickets that should not have been created at first place. So what we did is that we changed our mobile app and we added a toggle button, I'm traveling, just by that. And that was pretty good, right? But we thought that we could do more. Instead of looking at only the design as a solution to the problem, we also look at machine learning. And we use machine learning to detect whenever there was a card-present transaction abroad. And if that was the case, we would automatically enable that feature toggle for the customer because it was a card-present transaction. But if the card was not present, that would probably mean that the card could have been cloned. And so instead of going that direction, we would simply temporarily block the card and send a push notification email to the customer saying, hey, your card might have been cloned. And if that's the case, let us know so we can create a chargeback for you and we will reissue your card automatically. If that's not the case, just go to the mobile app and unblock your card again. So when you care about your customer, it's all about the little things. You want to create a wonderful experience for them. And we had to start somewhere. So when we started with a completely digital credit card was the first option in Brazil that was mobile first. And in terms of strategy, it makes a lot of sense to start with a credit card instead of a checking account, and I'll tell you why. You cannot simply tell people, hey, I'm a new bank, digital, we're purple, put your earnings in our bank because we're great. People won't fall for that. They're going to ask things like, what if this new fintech fails? What will happen with my money? But instead of doing that, we decided to take the burden for the customer because it's easier for people to take credit from newborn institutions than the other way around. So by doing that, we were kind of preparing our customers based on those four pillars for other new offerings or new products. And with great customer experience and technology, people were eager to get more out of Nubank. The two biggest complaints that we had and that we currently have were, I wasn't approved for the credit card, or I want a higher limit. And the translation of that is, I want to put more of my financial life to Nubank. I want to put that to you. I trust you. And by listening to what our customers wanted, we decided to create a loyalty program. So in mid-2017, we launched our rewards program, and it was integrated with the app, 100% online. You get points instantly whenever you use your card, no waiting. Also, the points, they never expire. That's cool, right? So no tricks, no small letters. We did a simple program with a very transparent mindset because we've seen that the other programs, the other offerings were all about those small letters. There was a lot of complexity in there. And since we wanted to have this transparent mindset, we were telling our customers that if they were not spending $500 or more on a monthly basis, the program was not worth for them. And we told them since the product launching. So this transparency and simplicity, they build trust with our customers, and customers have to trust their banks. It's all about the long term. You don't want to create a relationship and screw it up because of some goal for a quarterly result or something like that. So in Brazil, we don't have a positive credit score record like here in the US. We only have a credit risk information for people that are ready to credit. So for us, this very fact created a situation where we were declining about 70% of people that were trying to get the credit card product. That's very bad for our business and very bad for the customers because we could not have like that risk. So what we did is that we decided to create a product that had no risk in order to democratize great customer experience for financial services in Brazil. And we created our version of a checking account that was mixed with a savings account. So it has daily liquidity and bears you interest with 0 fees. And in Brazil, if you're transferring from a bank to another bank, you usually pay $5 per transfer. So having no fees was a big deal for people. And in my opinion, there was a time where physical branches were assets. Now, I think they used to protect your business, but now they are liabilities because everyone's having a digital online life. And in Brazil, about 60% of the population is unbanked. This means that we're not only getting market share from other banks, but we're also increasing the market size. And talking about how we're increasing the market size, we're also entering new markets. I cannot tell you when, but we're coming to Mexico and Argentina really soon. So it's an exciting time to be in Nubank. I like to think that is like Amazon selling CDs back then. We did a lot, but there are many things to be done. But going a little bit more technical, how do you enable developers to be customer obsessed? This digital world where everything is online and everyone's connected, we would like to think of banking as a software engineering problem and not an operational problem. We want to look at the tech lenses. So there are 4 characteristics that we'll cover today here: autonomy, reliability, scalability, and velocity. Oops, sorry. So take autonomy. We want the engineering team to feel empowered to execute independently with a cradle-to-grave mentality. You build it, you run it. We don't want to have DevOps engineers or DevOps teams. We want a real DevOps culture. We also want the best for our users, so reliability is a feature. In matter of fact, there's a certain scale that you reach where the 3 most important features of a product are, number 1, the product works. Number 2, the product works. And number 3, repeat with me, the product works, right? So we want to ensure proper reliability, and carefully managing the blast radius and time to fix for inevitable bugs is paramount. Incidents will happen. They will. They will happen. So I like to think of an incident as an investment that you are making. It's an investment that you don't know how much you're going to spend. You don't know when we will invest. But the best thing you can do is to get the most out of it. You have to maximize the ROI of that investment. So if you're looking at things with a different mindset, you start getting better and better and better instead of trying to blame people and choke necks. So you have to learn and improve upon that. You also want to build things for the long term, things that scale out instead of scaling vertically. And you want velocity, a lot of velocity. You want the maximum engineering throughput that you can get within certain guardrails. So risk mitigation is key to achieve that. So let's go ahead and explore autonomy. When we talk about autonomy, one of the worst things that happen in the banking industry is that the dictatorship of the security teams, right? So when the incentives are not aligned, the security teams are adversarial and they create friction and bureaucracy that prevents engineering throughput to be maximized. Don't get me wrong, security is key. It's probably the most important thing you can do in the banking industry for your users. But there are different approaches to that. So let's look at this kitchen analogy here. So looking at a restaurant industry, you can think of using AWS IAM roles being very similar to making every engineer a chef or kitchen staff with a direct access to different parts of the kitchen. We have different roles and responsibilities, and that things mostly work, right? Not really, because there are different specializations in a big organization. You don't want your restaurant customers to jump into the kitchen and prepare their own food. You have a menu for that. So when you have different roles and responsibilities, you have the chef creating the menu with the options for the customers. The customers order from the menu. The kitchen staff prepares the food. The waiter gets the food from the kitchen, brings to the table, and the customers eat. You get a point. But although some of your front-end engineers, they might know a little bit about IAM, or perhaps a lot of about IAM, what they actually want is to put that static web page in CloudFront. And basically, they just want to eat. And if you put them in the security or inside the kitchen, you get a lot of instant ramen. So you might end up with things that you don't want for the long term. You might not get nutrition, you know. So if the restaurant is big enough, the kitchen staff also has different responsibilities. So in Nubank, let's see how that's done. So there's a security engineering team, and they have access to great tooling, sharp knives, sophisticated plate warming, and they deliver value in small batches. They're developing our authentication and authorization systems. They're working with mutual TLS. They're re-architecting our security components to be able to scale with the company. They're another team. They are the Security Operations Center. And this team is like getting great instruments to measure temperature drift, or if the people in the kitchen are the authorized personnel. And when it comes to technology, they are creating alerts and dashboards to ensure that we have a great visualization of what's happening. They are going to configure and tune AWS Shield, AWS WAF. We also have a blue team. And this blue team, they will harden our infrastructure and applications. They will create a threat modeling matrix for our CI/CD tooling. They also will create a plan to mitigate those risks. They will follow up with the teams to ensure proper action is being taken. And then you have the red team. It's the most fun team to be in, right? They're basically trying to hack people all the time and trying to discover possible vulnerabilities. It's an internal team for pen testing that we have. And they'll try to get into the local network, to the printers. They'll try to escalate permissions. They'll send phishing emails to key employees, to C-level people. And they will create a backlog for other teams when they find those vulnerabilities. And we have these in-house security teams, which is a little bit different from most companies. But one thing that I find really interesting is about having the physical infrastructure team or the IT ops team inside the information security organization. Because one of the biggest attack vectors in our industry is the local network. So if you have the physical infrastructure embedded with the information security, you get the right alignment for that. And all of these teams, they have to be open and willing to collaborate with the rest of the company because since they are in different phases of the life cycle, they're working closely with other control functions, they have to understand, and they do understand, that if they don't create the right incentives in the company, we're going to have stuff like shadow IT. You will have people that, when the people don't get the right access to do their jobs, they're going to share passwords. And that's terrible for audit trail. And for many other reasons, right? But to enable engineers to be customer obsessed, we want them to have the exact minimal permissions to do their jobs. These permissions have to be fine-grained, just enough to accomplish work. They should be under constant evolution and scrutiny. We created those mechanisms in Nubank based on AWS Lambdas, and there are 80 official Lambdas that are using for managing account providers and organizations and many other different things. But we also have a curated list of IAM roles and IAM groups that give access to specific operations on AWS services. And those are very fine-grained operations on AWS. And together with Lambdas, they are also used for temporary privilege escalations. So these Lambda functions, they're actually being run and monitoring the state of the system and revoking and removing expired permissions. So we have a self-healing mechanisms controlling everything. And for the the auth scopes, we use about 300 different scopes. They are basically JWT tokens, auth style with an endpoint level granularity. And we do restrict some scopes and to be used only when people do some certain of trainings. We also restrict some toxic combinations, and they are also automatically ripped after inactivity. And another thing that we do to enhance autonomy is microservices. So it's hard to have a clear ownership of a monolithic architecture. And you know that a dog with 2 owners dies of hunger. So every team owns a set of microservices from cradle to grave. And you build it, you run it model. You know the classic fight between dev and ops teams, right? To avoid that, the team that does dev should also do ops. And if the service has a lot of tech debt or a lot of crashes or incidents, the engineers that develop the service, they will get paged in the middle of the night. So they have the right incentives to avoid that, right? And on the other hand, if the team is only looking at operations and everything is green, low latency, 0 error rate, does that mean that everything's good? Not really. In Nubank, this just means that this team is slow. It's not taking risks. So having the right feedback loop for the teams fosters autonomy better than anything else. And talking about reliability in ops, security teams can get proper reliability without adding too much friction to other engineers if they're using the right model. So remember a cool kitchen analogy. So we want engineers to order from the menu so they can focus on the end customer. And with this security as code term, our code is the recipes. And instead of having a human doing that, we want to have a robot kitchen staff to prepare the food. So the software developers, they don't depend too much on other humans to do their jobs. And do you think that's confusing? I will show you how AWS is helping us to do that. So in terms of security as code, there's an issue when we give people permission to create roles. So when you have an IAM role creation, you could also have a privilege escalation. So this is the before phase, and I'll show you the before and after, how our lessons during the process. So the engineers, they were autonomous, and they were creating infrastructure using this Git repository named deploy in Nubank. And this repository would create dynamic CloudFormation JSON templates, contain everything necessary to run a microservice in our architecture. That would be like a load balancer, autoscaling groups, logic configuration, DNS, instance profile, and of course the IAM role. So we were giving full autonomy to them, but if we're giving this autonomy, that meant that they could create an IAM role that could have possibly any permission on AWS. So they could do that, SSH into the instance and do whatever, like delete S3 buckets or things that are very important for us in terms of reliability. It could be in a malicious sense, like they want to do that on purpose. But if the developer, even if they're not malicious, there was a lot of copy and paste going on, right? Because to create the right IAM roles and policies, you know the drill. Who never thought, like, I'm going to create this permission with S3 star just quickly here, and then I'll look at it afterwards and remove it, and then it goes on forever. So this, of course, led to these star permissions that you don't want to have in your environment. And it was clear for us that the engineer should be able to create IAM roles. No engineer should be able to create IAM roles to prevent these two issues. So what we decided is that we wanted to go to an AWS Lambda approach. So the engineer uses the same deploy repository to create the microservice, but she doesn't have the permissions to create IAM roles anymore, but she has permissions to invoke a Lambda function that will do the creation of that IAM role. So you get even better granularity because the Lambda can be more fine-grained than IAM. So these permissions that could be a set were also curated from a curated set of policies. And this prevented permission escalations that I've mentioned, but if someone could manipulate or create or modify a Lambda function, then you would have another corner cases, right? So it doesn't actually solve anything. So to avoid that, nobody has permissions to modify and create Lambda functions in Nubank. What we have is that we have two repositories here, one being IAM policies, and any engineer can create pull requests in the repository and change these permissions, but you would need to get approval from the InfoSec members. And then after that's done, that's going through CI/CD, and a Lambda will change the IAM roles in staging and production environments. And for the Lambda automation, this is where all our Lambdas are maintained and stored, also a Git repository. So the same thing happened, and if anyone could possibly add or change a Lambda, but they would need to get approvals from the InfoSec teams to get that to staging and to production environments. So still talking about security, what I want to think in terms of proper reliability is that defense in depth is essential. So boundary defense doesn't address our attack vector, because once the boundary is compromised, it's necessary to defend the subsequent layers. So for example, here we have a customer, and all the Nubank customers should have a certificate issued by Nubank pinned to their cell phones. And with multi-TLS, if the customer doesn't have the certificate, they cannot even establish a TCP connection with some of our more important services. So for storage, we use IAM roles, some specific IAM roles, segregation with security groups, and also encryption at rest with our own keys, of course. And for asynchronous communication, we rely on Kafka. We sign all the messages digitally, and the sensitive topics are fully encrypted. For our office network, every employee also has a certificate pinned and that was issued by us. So there is no sharing of Wi-Fi passwords, because without the certificate, you simply cannot connect to the network. So these certificates can put the employees in different groups based on their functions, and those are put in different segregated subnets inside our systems. So if someone also has to SSH into a server, the AWS session manager makes all the session auditable. And talking about audit trails, what we want to have is everything set up to do a forensic analysis in advance before that crime or the incident happened, right? So what we do is that we have different multiple logs covering same flows for redundancy, and CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, DNS requests, HTTP requests, etc. All of the logging is being shipped to Splunk, and where we have alerting and dashboards with a 90-day retention period. And we do ship all of these logins to S3 for archiving, so we don't forget anything that happened. And we also have a daily ETL processing that enables us to do sanity checks for our database workloads, because we can check systems consistency in a distributed world. So AWS Redshift is providing that capability for us. And to protect our customers and to satisfy regulators, monitoring is essential. So not only we want to detect problems as fast as possible, but we want to fix them as fast as possible, and we want to prevent them from happening. So the most embarrassing thing that can happen is knowing that your site is down because a customer told you so. But that happens, and life goes on, right? And we want to ensure that we are learning from our mistakes. So we want people to do post-mortem analysis, get to the root cause, and ensure that the action items are being implemented. We want to get better. We want to get better really, really soon, but we don't want to blame people. We want to focus on automation instead of bureaucracy. We want our systems to be so automated and reliable that even if someone inside our company tries to take us down on purpose, they won't be able to do so. So there are many, many reasons why these things are important. And talking about scalability, you don't want to have higher latency or bad correctness for your systems, because more people are using your service in a Black Friday or another event. And in Nubank, we run 13 Kubernetes clusters in production with 70 M5 12x large nodes per cluster. And each cluster runs about 900 pods if you include the kube system namespace. We also have about 1 billion HTTP requests on a daily basis and 700 million Kafka messages. And this is pretty big, so how do we scale all of that? So we use a sharding strategy or a cell-based architecture. And for each cell, we have all that's necessary to support a customer in Nubank. All microservices, databases, Kafka services, Kafka clusters, Kubernetes clusters, load balancers, all of it is self-sufficient from a customer point of view when they are living in a shard. So take S0, for instance. We have the purple customers in S1. We have the orange customers, and in S2, we have the blue customers. Although S0, S1, and S2, they share the same code base functionality, the data that they have is completely different. So the data from Orange customers, it's always going to be only in S1. It's not going to be anywhere else, never. So this makes us able to create more infrastructure if we want to have more capacity, because when infrastructure is code, and we know how many customers each of these shards or cells can handle, we can simply create a new shard to support another million customer, let's say. So these shards or cell-based architecture are really good for scalability, but another thing that they bring is blast radius mitigation, because if you have a Kafka cluster problem in our S0 shard, customers from S1 and S2, they don't get affected. So you have a thing where you can have incidents and have outages, but people will generally not notice unless they are in the specific shard. That's awesome. And by offering a lot of microservices, we can scale horizontally, individually. The services that are more demanding for that period of the day. And we offer many services. So instead of having a monolithic architecture where you have to scale all your application because of one of the services, you can just scale the features that are most used. And that's, you gain a lot of efficiency. And in terms of scaling organization, each team works with a subset of microservices and behaves like a mini startup inside a company. They have the context and they have the ownership and can focus on what is really important for that part of the business. So with microservices, the engineers, they are less afraid of change and the impact of change. We reduce the conflicts and the dependencies between the teams and we get more done. That's what we want. We get more done. We want to add more value to our customers while mitigating the risk and the blast radius and being able to scale. And talking about getting more done to our customers, velocity and innovation, they work close to each other in some sort of self-reinforcing feedback loop. So we can start by looking at our applications. And in Nubank, we deploy more than 400 times a week without having a change advisory boards, no change management, no downtime window. Isn't that crazy for a bank? So how do we do it? If it hurts, do it more often. We do incremental changes in the code base and have someone reviewing the pull request. Then we run different types of testing, unit testing, integration tests, consumer-driven contract tests, and then we deploy to our staging environment. After we're done with that, we deploy to our production environment, and then we do monitor, right? And if everything goes well, we just keep going with a new incremental change. So here in the upper part of the slide, we can see that happening for a single microservice named Bureau. And for that microservice, you can see there are two, I don't know if you can see actually. Can you see, can you read it? No? So I think the fourth pipeline is Bureau to stage and the fifth is Bureau to prod. And you can, I don't know if you can see actually, but I'll describe it. So there are some parts of the pipeline, parts of the steps that are unchecked, they're white. And those steps of the pipeline, they are the rollback steps. So for each of the pipeline, we have a rollback step that will have us, in case of a failure, we can just click on a button and we'll trigger a rollback. Because as you know, most incidents are caused by deployments. And that's why people are afraid of deployments. So there are some ways that you can prevent deployments to be so dangerous. So having greater test coverage, test for production schemas, run canary deployments, feature rollouts. So those are very important techniques that you can use to mitigate those risks. So we use Circle CI and Go CD for our tooling, and we deploy on Kubernetes, which enables us to do faster deployments and faster rollbacks because it's way easier to create a process than to create a new VM faster. So we depend on Prometheus and Grafana for the monitoring of our production workloads. But if AWS enables you to do infrastructure as code, then you should have deployments of your infrastructure in the same way you would do with your application. So we have these two Git repositories. One is definition, where we have EDM files, which is basically a closure equivalent for JSON. And they contain definitions of all the deployable units in a declarative DSL format that we have, a proprietary one. Then we have the deploy project that I mentioned previously, acting as a wrapper for the Kubernetes and AWS APIs. So it will read from these definitions, those declarative things, and then it will transform our proprietary version of the word into CloudFormation JSON or Kubernetes YAMLs and be able to talk with those APIs. So how many of you know blue-green deployments? Probably many of you, right? Okay, so imagine that you want to change your service discovery provider or update your server Linux versions or migrate to Kubernetes or anything. Those big changes in the infrastructure. Hey. But your infrastructure is code, so you can extend your code, you can create testing scenarios for the code, and think of good abstractions. So after you're done with the code part, you have to deploy. So let's say you have your version of the word of your infrastructure, Green1 v1.0, up and running. And then with the new code, you deploy the new version of the word, the new version of the infrastructure. And that's done without changing what's actually serving your customers currently. So after you create those things with the AWS API, you check if everything is healthy. And if that's the case, you are ready to point the DNSs to your new version of the infrastructure, the blue one, the V2, right? So the cool thing about it is that if something doesn't go as expected, rollback is as easy as changing a DNS to the old version of the infrastructure again, so you don't have updates in place. You have immutable infrastructure now. You have a blue-green for your infrastructure. But the one thing that's cool is that you can have canary deployments by using weighted alias records on Route 53. So you can just put 5% of the traffic to the new version of the infrastructure, and you have canary deployments for your infrastructure too. So yeah, you can rebuild your whole infrastructure without any big risk with this approach. And once you're done with it, you can simply delete the CloudFormation templates or stacks that were provided in the old infrastructure, and you're good to go. But if you're not confident enough, you could have both versions of your infrastructure running for weeks in parallel or so until you're safe. Imagine doing that in your data center. Impossible or costly. So I want to wrap up here with some of the lessons we've been learning. Customer obsession is a drive for better products, growth, and better customer experience. Sorry to say, but if you're doing digital transformation because you're afraid of getting disrupted, you're doing it for the wrong reason, and you'll probably fail. And technology is not a cost center anymore. Technology is now focused in adding more value to the customers, and you can do it with different techniques nowadays. I won't lie to you, microservices, if you want the benefits of the microservice, you need a ton of automation. But it will help with scalability, reliability, velocity, and autonomy in a beautiful flywheel. So regulators, they expect audit trails, they expect monitoring, they expect risk mitigation and accountability. But this has nothing to do with change advisory boards and CI culture. So what we want to do is minimize the risk of deployments by using unit and integration testing, feature rollouts, canary deployments, and deploying frequent small changes instead of big batches of changes. You want to empower your engineers and automate things so hard that even if someone intentionally wants to break things, it won't be possible. We're hiring in different locations. We're hiring in São Paulo, we're hiring in Berlin, in Mexico City, and in Buenos Aires. If we have the time, I would be happy to take some of your questions. Thank you. Okay, a question there.
What do you think was the toughest challenge you faced? I guess.
Can you talk?
What do you think was the toughest challenge you faced with regard to, I guess, implementing everything in AWS and getting everything with regard, specifically either specifically with regard to the banking industry and financial services, or with regard to in general, the whole migration?
Well, that's a very tough question because there were so many, right? I think there are different types of challenge. One is bootstrapping, and not having all the licenses and depending on a lot of partners that are using a bunch of XMLs and things that are protocols that are proprietary that don't actually exist, and having your partners or vendors that are doing part of your banking system failing or having inconsistencies and having to debug all of it and then migrate to your own infrastructure and to your own services while you want to own more of your own destiny. That was a big problem for us in the beginning. But another one that I can say was really scaling, right? Because there are growth pains when you're growing that fast. If you're in this exponential growth living in your organization, suddenly you have to hire more people, and how do you ensure that you have the right culture for everyone? So I think there are technical challenges and there are cultural, organizational challenges, but it's really hard to point one that was the hardest one. I think each person in Nubank would say a different one. Question there.
Since you're running everything in the cloud, how do you manage your DR strategy? Like, how do you switch between the AWS regions?
We're using the São Paulo AWS region for a production environment in Brazil, and for a staging environment, and for data analytics, we are using US Virginia. Question?
Thank you for your references to the blue-green deployments, but I was wondering if you considered using App Mesh to do the various blue-green and canary deployments.
You mentioned App Mesh?
Yes.
Yeah, like going to a more service mesh architecture. Okay. Yeah, that's probably on the roadmap, but it's something new. And we avoid most of the problems that App Mesh and Service Mesh solve by using Finagle. So we have a very homogeneous stack in our environment. We close your shop, and we rely a lot on common libraries that we develop ourselves and have wrappers for other different libraries. So Finagle is the library that Twitter created before Service Mesh could possibly exist. And it solves things for exponential backoff, retries, deadline budgets, all of it. So that's living in our services inside the JVM, inside the service, so you can also tune a little bit better the exception handling, and instead of being sidecars. So a different context for us.
How much did the Brazil regulations affect how you design things, and then the markets that you're going into? And I don't know how much you know about U.S. regulations, but if you could compare that would be good too.
I don't know that much about the U.S. regulations, but I can tell you a little bit about how it was for us in Brazil. So at first in Brazil, there was no real clarity if we should run our infrastructure in São Paulo, South America region, or if we could run the infrastructure abroad, because there were no regulations regarding that. And that's like the worst case scenario, because it's not clear what you can do and what you cannot do. And eventually they got the regulations that said that we could be out of that region, and we probably could have a lot of cost savings by moving to a different region, but we're not doing that because there are so many things to do, right? But in comparing to the US, I think Brazil has a higher inflation, but also it has things to cope with this higher inflation from the 80s and 90s, where we have a central hub provided by this central bank, where you can get instant transfers from different banks anywhere. There's a hub, a protocol for the central bank, so you can get transfers. And this comes from the hyperinflation phase in Brazil, where if you depended on having to send a check from the West Coast or to the East Coast, you would lose like 7 days of interest or something like that. So your money would basically be less valuable. So things in Brazil are different in many aspects. People used to pay with the credit card. They used to pay with a lot of installments, even if they don't have to. They use credit cards as a means of payments instead of being for credit. So it's just because they want to pay things, and it's easier to do that than carry money. So when it comes to financial lives, every country has its aspects. being able to depend on Visa or MasterCard for credit card changed a little bit because you have this sort of one protocol for all the world, but it also has its localizations.
You mentioned that you started with a credit card product and you later switched to checking and savings accounts. And you were talking about how 60% of Brazil is unbanked and you were penetrating that market, creating a new customer base. But how do you measure the credit risk of the customer base, period, whether it's issuing a credit card or offering a checking and savings account?
So for the checking account, you don't actually have a lot of credit risk because the money that people will use is the money that they have deposited. But for the credit card, since there was in Brazil this negative record where you can only have the record if you already took some credit, we had to kind of, there are credit bureaus that we get the data from, and sometimes we don't find the data. So what we're doing is like getting more people into our checking account and look at how their financial life actually is, how much money they get deposit, how much they are transferring. And we're using this data, that's proprietary data, to do this credit analysis. I think we're good, or any more questions? Okay, thank you so much.